I'm 55 with no savings, no retirement, and no home ownership. I'm terrified. 10 years ago, I was married, a stay-at-home wife and mom for 15 years. When my husband abruptly walked out, long story short, he planned for months to leave me for another woman. I was shocked to learn that he had stopped paying the mortgage and drained our savings, leaving me with our children in a foreclosed home. I received nothing in the divorce as there was no assets left. The past decade has been rough, and I've struggled to get by. I bring home a measly $2,500 per month. I have no idea how to get out of this mess, and I'm terrified about my financial future. I want to own a home again somehow, and I know I need retirement savings, but at this point, I don't know what's feasible. Where do I start?
Man, that's like getting kicked while you're down. Mm-hmm. Like seriously, like your husband leaves you and doesn't pay the mortgage and drains the savings, and you know, we're a stay-at-home mom and wife, so like your career prospects is just not there. You know, I imagine she was probably a stay-at-home mom and wife for several years, you know, so it's just like, how do you get back into the job market after that? Like that's a rough situation. Yeah.
And I feel like, I don't know, this person is 55. So it's like, that's a later stage to be starting. But I understand wanting to own a home again. That probably felt, you know, like you had this home, you had a family, and now you have nothing. But I feel like you do have a new opportunity here. And I think that comes from, it doesn't come from owning a home. It comes from standing on your own 2 feet and doing this on your own. Now, as to like, where do you start with this? I feel like I said, I don't know if owning a home is in the picture at this point. But just, I don't know. I think just the very basic of like starting from the very beginning, you know, I don't know what this person like has left over, because it says they're living in a foreclosed home. I'm guessing they had to move out. They're renting probably, but I don't know what they were left over with. I don't know how that works in divorce. Like if there's debt, obviously he probably has it if it's in his name, but I don't know if she has any debt or anything like that, but probably walking like what we talk about all the time, like the different steps of how to get there, and just start there. It's going to have to be basic, but knowing that you're on your own 2 feet again is, I think, you know, you're out of this relationship with a person who doesn't deserve you.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, you know, you kind of mentioned it, but I think a big part of this is this person's going to have to re-envision what their retirement is going to look like. You know, if they're 55, they're barely scraping by $2,500 a month. They don't own a home. It doesn't sound like they have any retirement savings, or probably any other savings for that matter. Like your retirement's just going to be different, you know? And so what I think you could do to set yourself up for the best possible retirement, given your current situation, is how do we get your income up? You know, that way, if we can focus, because right now the biggest issue, like obviously is number one is time, but number two is you have a huge income problem. Like $2,500 a month, does not get you far in any part of the country, you know? So, you know, I think if this person can focus on how do I increase my income from 2,500 to 3,500, then to 4,500, you know, then to 5,500. Now you're starting to make 60K a year. Like, all right, now we can actually start to have some wiggle room in terms of paying the bills and putting some money aside. But I mean, unless this person gets a massive increase in their pay, they're probably going to continue working for the next, you know, for the foreseeable future into their retirement. And so they gotta just shift what retirement is going to look like in their mind, I think.
Yeah. It's probably not going to be like sitting on a yacht somewhere, and they know that. It's probably, and the thing is, like, they haven't been working, so they haven't been paying into Social Security. So I would assume whatever they're getting is probably very small at this point. No, you know, like you said, it's just going to have to look different, whether that's, you know, always working some sort of part-time job, or working the job that you can get with like your skill set at this point, because you were off for so long. And then maybe doing some things on the side. Obviously you were a stay-at-home mom. I'm sure you're good at a few things like that, you know, like whether it's watching kids in the evening, you can make a lot of money doing that stuff on the side. Or if you're a good baker or something like that, like there's things that they can do to sort of supplement this that might even roll into their retirement too, or turn out to be a really awesome side business. You never know.
Yeah, it's just so it sucks to see people who are in situations like this, and like, you know, like this is kind of related to what I was talking about earlier, but like I go into Home Depot like several times a week at this point. There's a few people in there who are, you know, noticeably into their like 60s, maybe even 70s. And I'm like, I don't think you're working at Home Depot as like, you know, helping people check out in your 60s and 70s. Either you really love Home Depot or you really need the money, you know? And it's just tough to see people who you can tell they even have a hard time kind of moving around. And, you know, that's definitely not, you know, my dad's in his 70s, he moves around great. So it's definitely not everyone who's in their 60s and 70s, but you can tell like these people, like they don't have It doesn't seem like they have enough money to take care of themselves where they wouldn't need to work. And so they do need to work. And if they're working, at a place like that, and that's probably a similar situation to this person, where if they're making $2,500 a month, like it's probably not a job that's very high, like a high skill job, which is going to pay them well. And so they're probably on their feet a lot all day. Like as they get older, it's just not going to be a fun situation. And so, if this person uses really probably the next 5 years, how can I really start to increase the income? Like, and whether that means I have to learn a new skill or take some of the skills that, like you said, like if you were really good at baking, which I imagine being a stay-at-home mom and wife, you probably did your fair share of baking, maybe that's something that you could turn into like a side business or something like that that's going to help you generate more income.
Yeah. And I think the biggest thing is like owning a home is not, I think we tie it so closely to like our worth and like how worthy we are and like how stable we are and financially ahead. And it's like, that's probably not in your future at this point, at least where you're at right now. Let's probably focus on retirement a little bit more than owning a home, because even if you're renting, it's a safe space over your head. It's your landlord can take care of things that go wrong. The last thing you want to do is buy a home, then things go wrong, and then you're really in a really bad situation. So that's kind of where I'm at there. One thing I thought about on the side here as we were reading through this is really nothing to do with, where they go from here, but just calling out, it doesn't seem like her and her ex-husband ever communicated about the finances, even though she was, just because she was staying at home, not working, seems like he was sort of running the show. And then because she said she was shocked to learn that he had stopped paying the mortgage. So I think that's a really big learning lesson for a lot of people out there. Even if you are staying at home, if you're not bringing in an income, you should still have, equal say in the finances, or at least be looking that over every single month, because this is exactly what you don't want to happen, right? Because this person was blindsided because they just didn't know.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think, if you're a stay-at-home parent, that doesn't mean that you're less involved in the finances because you're not bringing home like a quote unquote an income, right? Like you're still financially providing for the family by taking care of some of the largest expenses, which is going to be childcare, cooking, cleaning for the home, like taking care of the home. Basically, that's a huge financial burden that if you choose to work instead of stay home, whichever parent it is, like you got to weigh, is that going to make financial sense? Because it's just going to cost money. Am I going to make more than that? But in terms of like avoiding this, moving, like for someone who's in a similar situation, like you got to be involved in the finances. Like it doesn't matter if both people are making the income or only one person is making the income. Like both of you should know, how do I get into all the accounts? How do I make sure that all the bills are getting paid? Because in a similar situation, what if what if her husband had died, right? And it's not such a I mean, obviously it's still a very sad situation, but it's not such a a kick me while I'm down situation where the husband leaves and destroys her life. It's like, no, like, like now your primary source of income, your husband is gone. Like, what do you do in that situation? It could have ended up in a similar place, even though the situation was drastically different. Like, I think that's why it's so important too. Like if one person's going to stay home, that the person who's providing the income, like they still take advantage of ways to contribute to the other spouse's retirement. Like especially like you could still invest in your spouse's Roth IRA, for example. As long as one of you has an earned income, you can still invest inside of a Roth IRA. So finding ways to make sure that like if anything were to happen, that both people have retirement savings, access to all the accounts, like all of that is still in place no matter what.
Yeah. And I wish that this person had asked this like 10 years ago, because this is when this happened, and that they've sort of been struggling for the past 10 years, because I think, first off, 10 years later, they're still in this like negative sort of like mindset. And I feel like that is also impacting it too, because you just feel like so defeated and you have not, you feel like you still can't even stand on your own 2 feet. So I feel like, changing that mindset around a little bit and be a little bit more empowered, and maybe have thought about that, 10 years ago, how can you increase your income? To put towards your retirement savings and whatever else you want to own, maybe would have been a better idea, but I'm glad they're talking about it now. And I mean, 55 is still relatively young, in the grand scheme of things. So they can do some things to move forward, but I really think they just need to start, leaning into it a little bit more. I made it through this and finished raising my kids or whatever, and now this is how I'm going to handle this. So
that's almost the story you'd expect to hear 10 years later, not this story, which that's yeah, like you said, when something like this happens, you got to start thinking about it as quickly as possible.
The information information, opinions, and recommendations provided on this podcast are for entertainment purposes only and do not constitute professional financial advice. Any financial decisions you make based on the content of this podcast are your responsibility. We strongly recommend consulting with a licensed financial advisor or other qualified professional before making any significant financial decisions. By listening to this podcast, you acknowledge that we are not liable for any financial outcomes.